take statements from council members, and we will start by giving the floor to the representative from Bolivia.
Señora Presidenta, muchas gracias.
Madam President, thank you for giving me the floor and also for convening this open meeting of the Security Council. It's vital that not only the members of our organization, but also the whole world should see that the positions of the members of the Security Council in a totally transparent way, given what has taken over recent days in Syria. Bolivia has called for the convening of this meeting. We are concerned at what has taken place over recent hours. While the Security Council was debating proposals on what would be the investigation mechanism for the horrendous chemical attacks which have been witnessed by all mankind, while we were discussing the words which could be used in a resolution to be considered by this council, and while the permanent and non-permanent members put forward proposals for the text of such a resolution, the United States was preparing once again and carried out a unilateral attack. The missile attacks, of course, is a unilateral action. They represent a serious threat to international peace and security. Why? Because over the last 70 years, mankind has been establishing, building a structure, not just a physical structure, not just an institutional structure, but also a legal structure. They have established instruments of international law to precisely prevent a situation in which the most powerful attack the weakest with impunity, and to ensure a balance in the world, and of course to avoid serious violations of international peace and security. We believe it to be the duty of this Security Council, but not just of the Security Council, of the United Nations organizations in all its bodies, to defend multilateralism. We are here to defend multilateralism. We have agreed that this charter, the United Nations Charter, must be respected. And this charter prohibits unilateral actions. Any action must be authorized by the Security Council in accordance with the Charter. Allow me to read a couple of articles so that we can remember this. Chapter 24 says that in order to ensure prompt and effective action by the United Nations, its members confer on the Security Council primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, and agree that in carrying out its duties under this responsibility, the Security Council acts on their behalf. This Security Council, not just the 15 members who are seated at this table, we represent the 193 member states of this organization, and through them we represent the people of the world. And we have agreed that unilateral actions violate international law. Now, as we were discussing yesterday draft resolutions, while we were striving to come up with alternatives and come up with consensus in the Security Council, the United States not only has unilaterally attacked, but while we were just discussing here and demanding the need for an independent investigation, an impartial investigation, complete investigation into these attacks, the United States has become that investigator, has become the prosecutor, has become the judge, has become the jury. So where is the investigation which would allow us to establish in an objective manner who is responsible for the attacks? This is an extremely, extremely serious violation of international law. This is not the first time that this has happened. Throughout history, we can remember many episodes in which various powers, not just the United States, various powers have acted unilaterally and violated the UN Charter. But the fact that it's happened once again does not mean that the United Nations and its members must accept it. In September 2013, the United States also launched attacks against Syria. I recall what was said by the then Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, on that occasion. Allow me to read the quotation in English of what the Secretary General said. I quote,
"has primary responsibility for international peace and security. That's my appeal, that everything should be handled within the framework of the United Nations Charter. The use of force is lawful only when in exercise of self-defense in accordance with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, and or when Security Council approves such action." Cierro comillas.
end of quote. This was the position of the Secretary General, the then Secretary General, which contributed to avoiding unilateral action be taken in very similar situations to what we are experiencing today. Now, this attack does represent a threat to international peace and security because it represents a threat to the political processes in Geneva and Astana. It was said very well by Mr. Feldman in the Secretary General's message that it is vital to avoid an escalation of tension, which breaks with the progress that has been achieved in Astana in Geneva. And said that this is not the first time that this has happened. And I'd like to recall what happened in this very Security Council just a few years ago, and specifically on Wednesday, the 5th of February 2003, when the then Secretary of State of the United States of America came to this room to present to us, according to his own words, convincing proof that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I believe that we must absolutely remember these pictures, and that in this very hall, we were told that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and this was the motivation for an invasion. And that invasion, after this invasion, there was 1 million deaths. And it launched a series of atrocities in that region. Could we talk about ISIS if that invasion had not taken place? Could we be talking about this series of horrendous attacks in various parts of the world had that invasion, this illegal invasion, not taken place? I believe it's vital for us to remember what history teaches us. And on this occasion, the United States did affirm. They found that they had all the proof necessary to show that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. But they were never found. Never were they found. I'd like to repeat what was said. President Evo Morales this morning, and I quote, "I believe and I feel, I hope I'm not mistaken, that chemical weapons in Syria are just an excuse for a military intervention. The unilateral actions are imperialistic actions. The USA is not interested in international law. They ignore it when it's convenient to them. Internal problems of states must be resolved through dialogue and not through bombings. This is a threat to international peace and security." End of quote. I believe it's important to talk about the double standards when we're in the United Nations meeting rooms, and then when we're dealing with actual real lives. In my own people, the people of the Latin America and the Caribbean, throughout history, we've lived this reality. We're talked about all these words about human rights, which we respect, But when the speeches about human rights are not in sync with their interests, then they violate these human rights. The series of coups d'etats in Latin America were organized, funded by the CIA. This is historic truth. This is not rhetoric, it's a truth. Let's remember the coup d'etat in 1973 against the constitutional government of Salvador Allende. This was financed by the CIA. Let's recall where the schools in Latin America where soldiers were taught how to torture people, and this was part of the training of Latin American soldiers as part of the so-called national security strategy. When we can talk about human rights, but when it doesn't meet our interests, then it's not important to talk about human rights. And the same goes for democracy. When it's in line with democracy, we defend democracy. But if not, then we fund coup d'etats. And the same is happening with the Security Council and with this very council. When it's not in line with their interests, then multilateralism is not important anymore. When it suits them, multilateralism is fine. The United Nations is fine. But when it doesn't, when their interests are not in line, well, they're not interested either in the United Nations or in human rights or in democracy. When we condemn unequivocally chemical attacks, we say that the Security Council must not be used as an echo chamber for interventionism. The Security Council should not be used as a pawn which can be sacrificed on a chessboard, the chessboard of war. This Security Council of the United Nations is the final hope that we have to guarantee international peace and security based upon principles, on norms and international rule of law. Madam President, also, I'd like to point out that it's absolutely vital, as you have convened this meeting in a very transparent way, that we demonstrate the concern that unfortunately there are first-class and second-class members in the Security Council, the permanent members which not only have the right to the veto, but they also control the procedures, they control the decision-making. And the other 10, well, we may be involved if we are consulted or if we are convened occasionally, not just to underwrite some positions of others. This is not multilateralism. Bolivia would like to reiterate its robust condemnation of the use of chemical weapons or the use of chemical precursors in weapons to conduct criminal acts, irrespective of their motivation, wherever it may be, and by whomsoever it may be committed. And we do reiterate that we demand, when these cases took place, that there should be independent, impartial, and conclusive investigations. Unfortunately, the attacks yesterday have given a mortal attack on the joint investigative mechanism and against the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, so that they can undertake an investigation and find out exactly what did take place a couple of days ago in Iraq. The person responsible must be prosecuted and punished under the law, and the same with any violations of international law and which threaten international security. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you to the representative of Bolivia. And now we will give the